Tonight, let your thoughts idle like a small boat resting by the river. You are not here to hurry, you are here to drift. Close your eyes if you wish. Notice your breath, in and out, as the cool edge of night gives way to a pale, patient dawn. The air is still, and the great river, older than the oldest story you know, breathes with you. The Nile moves without hurry. And you do not need to move quickly either. Listen for a faint creak, the sound of wet rope easing against a wooden post. A little wave sighs against the reeds. Far away, a bird calls once, then twice, and then falls quiet again. The sky is leaving its deep blues and lifting into a grey so gentle it almost seems like soft cloth. In a short while, it will open into a tender gold, and the market will yawn awake. There is flour clinging to someone's forearms somewhere behind you. There is the faint sweetness of malt on the air. There is the sharpness of river water that has touched silt and reeds and clay jars. You do not have to hold any of it. You only have to notice and exhale. The day in the market will be very ordinary, unhurried, predictable in the way a tide is predictable, arriving, receding, and arriving again. That is enough for tonight. Riverbank and boats, quiet preparations. Along the Bien Song, the river landing, boats that worked through the night have found their places. They are narrow, simple, and well used, planks patched with care. Oars polished by hands that cannot remember when their work first began. The men who rowed them speak in low voices. They talk about the current, and the sandbars, and if the wind carried any promise of change. Mostly, they talk about nothing at all. A pile of wicker baskets sits in a regular pattern, 2 by 2. Then a neat row of 5. Then another small stack. They hold practical things, barley in small sacks, onions bound in braids, dried fish, bundles of reeds, clay oil lamps, and the day's papyrus sheets, wrapped in a plain cloth to keep them from the damp. The man who keeps the ledger touches a reed pen to a shell dish of ink. He makes a small mark, then another. He does not hurry. He checks the totals by moving his lips quietly, not because he doubts his arithmetic, but because he likes the feel of the numbers as they pass through his mouth. Beside him, a boy stretches, rubs his eyes, and tidies a coil of rope. You watch a jar of bialumach, barley beer, being lifted from the boat. The jar is rounded, sealed with a mud stopper, and marked with a thumbprint. It is not meant to be special, it is meant to be enough. Another jar follows. Then a shallow basket of coarse, round loaves, already baked before sunrise so that they could rest here like small suns waiting to be traded, sliced, or dunked. The market is not yet a market. It is a possibility carried by quiet hands, unloading, the rhythm of work. As the light grows, the sound of work becomes a soft pattern, shoes scuffing the packed earth. A grunt as 2 people lift a jar together. A short laugh cut off before it becomes loud. Larger boats nudge the shore. Someone hops down and lands with a thud that shakes a puff of dust from a post. The dust hangs, thinking about which direction to fall. A woman in a faded linen dress balances a shallow tray on her head, loaves of bread, each with a neat split across the top. Another woman follows with a tray of small cakes sweetened by date syrup. They set their trays on a plain mat and speak to each other without needing to ask the first question. Did the river behave? Did the wind change? The answers are visible in their bodies. The river behaved enough. The wind did not try anything new. A man opens a wrapped bundle of yai papyrus. The sheets cut straight, the fibers aligned, and he checks the edges with his thumb. He nods to the scribe who will buy them later, the same scribe who writes simple letters for people who do not wish to forget their words. The scribe lifts a hand in greeting and taps the writing case at his hip. More out of habit than necessity, on the river itself, the reflections begin to sharpen. Ropes form lines on the water. The hulls of the boats cast patches of shadow that the fish discover and investigate. Now and then, a fish breaks the surface with the smallest sound, like a finger touching the skin of a drum. No one looks up to the sky very often. Because the work is modest and close to the earth. And because the sky can be trusted to do what it always does, brighten, warm, and keep moving. Setting the stalls, a market appears. The sap hong, the stalls, arrive out of nothing. A old mat becomes a store. A wooden box turned on its side becomes a display. A woven screen becomes the edge of a shop that is not quite a shop. But it is enough for today. The aisles are suggested by practice rather than by rules. Each person remembers where they were yesterday. Each person chooses to be almost there again, on one mat. A careful line of onions sits like a necklace, the bulbs round and sure of themselves. Skins like old paper. On another. Pottery bowls wait upside down. Neat as a row of turtles. A vendor of fish lays out her catch, small river fish with pale bellies and silver backs. A few larger ones with dark, patient eyes. She moves a sprig of reed here. She shifts a bowl there. The arrangement does not seek praise, it seeks ease. At the edge of the row, a man sells salt in little cones. Each one formed by the simple shape of the mold. Each one the same modest weight as the next. He taps one cone. And it makes a soft sound, a dry knock. Like a polite visitor at a door. From somewhere behind the stalls comes the comforting, ordinary smell of banh mi, bread, as someone warms a few loaves on a flat stone to remind them to be generous with their fragrance. A child taken by the scent wanders nearer and is guided back by a gentle hand. Not now. The hand says. Soon, across from the bread. A basket of flax threads rests. A suggestion of future linen. Beside it, an old man displays little bronze needles in a tidy line. Not because they are expensive, but because order pleases him and his customers expect to find things where they found them before. The market does not announce itself. It simply is. The way a field is, or a river, or a familiar lullaby. The scribe arrives, reads. Ink. And quiet letters. The scribe sits cross-legged on a reed mat. He lays out his writing kit, a small wooden palette with two shallow depressions. One for black ink. One for red, a few reed pens trimmed with care, a roll of papyrus secured with a simple tie. People know where to find him. They come because they would like a small letter to travel farther than they can. They come because someone needs a record of a debt that will be repaid slowly. They come because a son wants to send a line of gratitude to a father in a nearby village. I am well enough. The barley grew. Please send the little knife you promised in the spring, the scribe writes. Not as ceremony but as service. When he asks for a detail, his voice is low and kind, a name to spell just so. A place described in terms that the runner will recognize. A small blessing added not for luck but for comfort. He folds the papyrus in a way that will invite the reader to open it as if opening a hand, between customers. He sharpens a reed with a small knife. He wipes the tip clean with a bit of cloth. He looks at the market as if it were a long text full of familiar words. He knows the fish seller's steady arrangement. He knows the salt cones. He knows the boy who counts jars for the beer woman and then tries to look as if he did not count them again for pleasure. A woman approaches with a short request, a recipe from her sister for a particular loaf that stays soft the day after baking. The scribe writes the little recipe plainly, measurements by handfuls and pinches, and smiles because he enjoys the economy of a useful sentence. The letters dry in the gentle air. The sun climbs. But it is polite about it. Barley beer, jars, ladles, and laughing quietly, near the center of the aisle. The woman with the bialumach has set her place with unassuming care. The jars are round-bellied and honest. A ladle made from an old gourd hangs by a string. Its surface smooth from years of dipping. A few small cups wait. Their rims slightly chipped in the way that loved tools often are. She pours only when asked. Her smile is not a performance. She adds a little extra to a cup for a man who helped lift a heavy jar without being asked. She refuses payment from the old woman with sore knees. Not because of charity, But because the old woman has been buying here since the market first became the market, and custom can be a kind of family, the beer is simple, cloudy, coolish in the morning, tangy with life. It is meant to be nourishing, not dazzling. People drink inside the way people do when something fits in the space that was waiting for it. The woman wipes the mouth of the jar with a clean cloth every so often. She does not count her cups out loud, she remembers them by the feel of the day. Two men talk quietly about grain prices. Another mentions the ferry upriver and how the ferryman almost never looks at the far bank. As if the wide current were a long sentence he is still sounding out. Someone laughs in a way that says, "Yes. That is exactly how it is." The woman replaces the ladle, reties the string, and pats the shoulder of the boy who counts jars. He pretends he does not love the praise, but he carries it like a warm loaf, bread, crust, crumb, and the familiar weight of a loaf. The bread stall is a study in comfort. The round loaves are arranged in a low pyramid, base wide, top small, the whole shape inviting. Each loaf shows where the dough expanded and split. A little line like a smile. A few flatter breads rest by the side for people who like to fold their meal and carry it away. The baker speaks softly to his daughter about the next batch, how long the dough must rest, how much ash to brush from the oven floor, which clay jar to refill with coarse flour. The girl listens with the patience of someone who has heard the instructions 100 times and welcomes them 101. Repetition is a kind of shelter. A man buys 2 loaves and asks for one to be wrapped with a strip of reed to carry on his forearm. A woman examines a loaf by tapping it with a finger, listening for a hollow sound. She nods once, satisfied, and pays with a little string of copper pieces that clink softly against each other like a small set of wind chimes. Nearby, a tray of small bon sweetened with dates glows a modest brown. A child watches, wide-eyed, as if the cakes might tell a story if looked at hard enough. The stall keeper slides one toward the child's mother and says, "For later." The mother thanks her and slips it into a cloth bag with a gratitude that will last the whole day. The baker wipes flour from his forearms with a dry cloth, leaving pale streaks like rivers that have chosen a new path. He hums a note that is almost nothing, and yet it holds the moment in place. Fish and reeds, cool work under the heat. As the sun finds its strength, the fish stall draws those who prefer to shop before the day grows serious. The seller sprinkles a little water now and then to keep the fish cool, and the droplets jump and shine. Short-lived stars in daylight. A woman selects 3 small fish, asking out of habit which ones are best for eating with bread dipped in oil. The seller answers truthfully, "These for frying, these for stewing, these for drying and saving for later when the river is stubborn and the nets are empty." When he says that last part, he does not mean to invite worry. He means to invite preparation. And the woman nods as if she has put the idea on a shelf for safekeeping. Beside the fish, a man tends to bundles of reeds. He sells them for mats, for baskets, for small repairs to roofs and walls. He sits cross-legged and braids an example strip as if to remind himself of the material's patience. The reed does not hurry. The reed will become what it is told, if it is told kindly. He keeps a short knife tucked into his belt, its handle worn smooth where his thumb circles it when he thinks. A single fly investigates a fish tail and is chased away with a flick. It lands elsewhere and is chased again, because that is its profession and this is his. No one is irritated. The day is simply doing what days do. Papyrus and pens, supplies for everyday memory. The papyrus vendor sits in the shade of a screen. He sells sheets, of course, bundles tied with plain cord, but he also sells the smaller pieces, offcuts and scraps for practice, for accounting, for the short notes that serve as reminders. A little bowl of reed pens is set out with their tips protected by small twists of fiber. He demonstrates the paper's surface by running a finger across it. Not too rough, not too polished. It accepts ink without sulking. He shows how the fibers align. their pattern gentle but visible if you hold the sheet just so. He explains this without bothering to sound like a teacher. Because everyone already understands what they need, paper that works. A young boy asks for a scrap for his first letters. The vendor gives him 2. The boy's mother tries to pay for the extra. The vendor refuses with a motion so practiced that it has become graceful. He bends a pen to show the right angle for writing and watches as the boy writes a line that looks like a river trying to remember its banks. The vendor praises the effort and means it. In a corner, a small jar of black ink sits with its lid placed at an angle that implies trust. It will not spill. It has not spilled yet. The vendor sets the lid straight anyway. Because small assurances are pleasant, the scribe from earlier drifts by, glances at the bundles, and chooses one simply because the day is easier when there is enough paper. The vendor ties the cord twice. Once to close. Once to be certain. The scribe thanks him and moves on at a pace that has nothing to prove. Bargaining, polite arithmetic. Here, bargaining is not a sport. It is a mild conversation in which arithmetic wears soft shoes. A woman asks whether 3 loaves and a small bowl of salt might travel together for the price she has in mind. The baker replies by lifting 1 loaf, feeling its generous weight, and suggesting a number that leaves room for her to nod. She does not nod at once. She adjusts her shawl. She looks at the salt cones. She thinks. And he lets her think. Finally, she offers a small counter. He smiles, he appreciates good numbers spoken respectfully. He agrees. And they both look satisfied in a way that is not triumph but alignment. At the fish stall, a different kind of calculation occurs. The oldest fish should leave the stall first. But not as a trick, rather as a courtesy to the day. The seller recommends a certain pair. And the buyer agrees. Because the seller has made his reasoning plain. The exchange is comfortable. Copper pieces change hands. Both parties say a word of thanks that is partly habit and partly sincere. The scribe bargains only rarely. His prices are small and fixed like pebbles. But he does sometimes add a blessing to a letter for free. And people leave with the feeling that their words will travel in good company. This is not a market of arguments. It is a market of adjustments. Of nearly there becoming there, midday, shade, water, and silence that listens. When the sun climbs to a thoughtful height, the market shifts. The shadows sharpen and invite people to step into them. Someone unrolls an awning and ties it with a knot that has held 100 times. Someone else dampens a cloth and lays it over a jar's mouth. A group sits by a wall in the shade, sharing bread and a little beer, breaking the loaf with hands that know exactly how much pressure to use. They eat in a comfortable quiet, interrupted now and then by the tock of a cup set down, or the dry laugh of a story that began without warning and will end without applause. A girl fans her grandmother with a woven palm fan. The movement slow and even. The grandmother closes her eyes. Not to sleep, but to listen to the air crossing her skin. She smiles without teeth, which is the same as any other smile when it is meant. The papyrus vendor sips water and writes a word on the back of a scrap for no reason other than to remind himself of the way ink meets fiber. The scribe folds his legs a different way to give his knee a rest. The fish seller finds a new reed sprig to keep the display fresh. The bread woman counts what is left without touching it. Because she knows, the river continues its patient sentence. And the wind chooses to read out loud every so often. Tools and repairs, the modest arts, under a small awning. A tool mender spreads his neat cloth. On it, a knife with a nicked edge. A set of bronze needles. The modest hook of a fisherman's line. The bent handle of a little pot. He warms a bit of metal until it is soft enough to listen. Then coaxes it back into a shape that suits its purpose. He does not rush the blade on the stone. He lets the stone remind the metal of a long, straight habit. He dips the knife in water and listens to the hiss as if it were a polite remark. He dries the blade and tests it against a piece of reed. It cuts without complaint. He nods once and sets it aside. A woman brings a basket with a broken rim. He binds a thin reed around the break, passing it through. under, over, under, over, letting the pattern do the thinking. When he finishes, he presses the repair with his thumb and smiles at the way the basket accepts the change. He charges a small price that respects both the basket and the day's heat. Children stop to watch, standing very still as if their bodies might get in the way of the quiet. The mender says nothing for a long time. Then he explains one small thing, that a patient hand is as useful as a sharp tool. The children nod. Not because they understand, but because the sentence sounded wise and gentle and good to agree with. Fragrance and food, onions, oil, and the small comfort of routine. At a stall near the center, a woman tends small clay bowls of oil. Some are plain. Some carry a hint of herbs. She keeps the bowls half covered to protect them from dust, lifting the coverings with care so that nothing spills and the scent rises only a little at a time. Next door, strings of onions hang like undecorated garlands. Their skins rustle when the breeze visits. A buyer requests a braid of 10. The vendor counts them by touch, lips moving in the smallest whisper, then adds an 11th because the buyer is kind to her old mother. And kindness is the source of many small extras. A man buys a few olives from a low bowl and eats one standing there, looking like someone who has made an important decision and wishes to linger to enjoy it. He pays and leaves. The aftertaste simple and clean. No one hurries. The sun occupies the sky with confidence. The market accepts this and becomes a little slower in its movements, as if the day were a garment that is pleasant but slightly heavy now. Messages and errands, words that travel. A runner visits the scribe, a slight man with steady cuffs and a calm face. He carries a little pouch for messages and a thin staff for balance. He does not brag about distance because the ground will decide that, not his mouth. He collects 3 letters, one for a cousin upriver, one for a debt to be settled by harvest, and one for a small apology that does not say sorry but says everything around it instead. The scribe folds the letters and seals them with a mark that is not pompous, only practical. He explains the roots with a finger on the papyrus as if tracing a child's cheek. The runner nods, listens once, listens twice, and then places the letters in his pouch without drama. He drinks a cup of water, thanks the scribe, and heads away along the river path. Not quickly, not slowly, but suitably, in his absence. The market feels the pleasant knowledge that words are moving outward on behalf of people who choose to stay where they are. The fish seller smiles at the idea. The bread woman straightens a loaf that did not need straightening. The papyrus vendor adjusts a bundle to keep the cord from biting into the fibers. The afternoon has begun, and it does not mind being noticed. Small comforts, a bench, a cup, and the shade of a palm. A few people share a bench under a palm. They talk little, and when they do, it is about what can be seen from where they sit, the pattern of footprints in the dust, the way a rope has begun to fray, the new notch in the awning pole that means someone found a knife sharpener. Someone tells a familiar story about a clay jar that cracked and yet held water anyway because the crack was gentle and the day was not hard on it. The others smile in the way one smiles at a story that has the right shape for the moment. A young man pretends he has not heard it before, so that the teller can finish with dignity. The beer seller refills 2 cups. One is for a man who has been quiet all morning. She does not ask why he is quiet. She gives him the cup as if saying, "Here is the space your quiet can sit in." He nods and drinks, and his quiet becomes less sharp. A stray cat passes through the aisle, unhurried, investigating the shadows with the care of a small inspector. It pauses, blinks slowly at nothing in particular, and continues. No one calls it. No one tries to own its moment. Afternoon tasks, counting without counting. Later in the day, many small counts happen. The baker mentally measures the flour left for tomorrow's first batch. The fish seller notes which size sells fastest today. The papyrus vendor ties one bundle to be certain. These are not anxious counts. They are the day's gentle arithmetic. The scribe stretches his fingers and writes his own name on a scrap just to see the letters behave. He says the name softly, as if greeting himself after a long absence. He shakes his head at the sentiment and smiles because it is harmless. A boy runs an errand to the oil stall, carrying a little jar with a lid that sits slightly proud because the thread is worn. He returns with the jar full and the lid seated better than before. He explains how the vendor put a strand of fiber under the lid to make it snug. He is proud of this trick, as if he invented it. Everyone agrees he may keep that pride. The sun has started its slow angle toward forgiving light. The air loosens its grip. The shadows return to being invitations rather than necessities. The temple nearby, the shape of reverence, near the market. A Naila, a simple temple practice, begins. It is not a grand festival. It is an ordinary offering, bread, beer, and words that move in a measured line. A priest or attendant, there is no need to decide which title is larger, lifts a small loaf with the care of someone handling a child's toy. He sets it down. He lifts a jar and tips it. He speaks a sentence that is older than his memory and will outlast his children's. A few market people pause at a respectful distance. They do not stop working because their work is also a kind of reverence. They incline their heads because the day is full of small bows, to the river, to the bread, to the way a reed becomes a basket when asked politely. The smoke from a little bowl of incense rises in a plain ribbon. It does not demand attention. It asks to be noticed the way a breeze asks for a window to be opened. The smell is dry and clean. Someone takes a deeper breath and feels it pass through them like a slow word. When it is done, it is simply done. The market exhales and continues. The way a person blinks and then looks again. Evening cool, packing, promises, and the comfort of repetition. As the heat drains from the day, people begin to gather what remains. Baskets are stacked carefully, heavy to the bottom, light to the top. Unused reed pens are wrapped in a small cloth. The fish seller rinses her tray with a bit of water and turns it upright to dry in the last light. The bread woman counts the loaves that will become tomorrow's crumbs and does not worry about it. The papyrus vendor ties his last bundle with the same steady knot he used in the morning. He rubs the cord once with his thumb to feel the friction and the certainty it brings. The scribe closes his ink with a small, satisfied nod and considers whether his knee will be more cheerful tomorrow. He decides it will. Because he has decided it before and been right enough. People speak of tomorrow without making it dramatic. They will return. The river will allow it. The market will accept it. A child asks if the cat will come again. And someone says, almost certainly. Meaning both yes and we do not own the cat's mind. The sun slides toward the far bank. The air grows almost kind. The first cool promises arrive. Night air, the market falls asleep, at last. The stalls become mats again. And the mats become rolls. And the rolls become something easy to carry. The aisle becomes a path that remembers feet. The path becomes a line that leads to a door. Then another door. Then to the river which has been waiting without any impatience at all. The last jar is lifted. The last cord is tied. A broom draws a slow pattern in the dust that will be erased by morning and drawn again. There is comfort in that. As there is comfort in the way the stars appear, one, then another, then a few more, until the sky is sprinkled with a language you do not need to translate to understand. You think of the bread that was baked, the beer that was poured, the papyrus that carried small, faithful messages. You think of the market as a body breathing, in with the dawn, out with the night. You place your thoughts on the river like little boats and let them drift. The day has finished what it was meant to do. It has been ordinary. It has been enough. You do not need to remember every detail. The river will remember for you. Evening cool. Home kitchens by the river. The market unspools into quiet streets. Evening folds over the town like a linen cloth shaken once, then allowed to settle. The market's last sounds fade, a rope's final creak. A hollow thump as a jar finds its corner. The hush of reed mats being rolled. Footprints soften in the cooling dust. The air carries a promise that the day will end kindly. People return along familiar lanes, packed earth that remembers sandals. Walls the color of warm sand. Doorways framed by shadow. You walk with them without weight. As if you were a small breeze, learn to be patient. A child hums a tune with only 2 notes. Someone else hums the same 2 notes from far away. The town nods along. At a doorway, a pot waits to be rinsed. A basket leans, empty and proud of it. The cat from the market appears again. As if summoned by the sound of lids settling. It inspects a doorstep, approves of nothing in particular, and sits with the dignity that requires no audience. You breathe in the evening, cooled clay, faint smoke, a whisper of onion and oil left on the air from the last frying pan. A simple day has decided to finish simply. Kitchens of clay, small flames, browned loaves, and steady hands, inside a home. The hearth glows without hurry. Clay bricks hold a memory of heat. A small pot simmers with a patient music, not quite a boil, not quite a whisper. The fragrance is trustworthy, breadcrumbs toasted in a thin film of oil. Onions softened until their sharpness becomes kindness. A spoon of lentils that have given up their stiffness and become food. A woman tears a round loaf along its crease and shares a portion as if dividing a soft secret. She dips a piece into the simple stew and tests the warmth with care. She sets aside a smaller piece for tomorrow's morning hunger. Wrapping it in cloth the way one wraps a blessing that should last, a man tends the small flame, adding slivers of wood no longer than a finger. The flame accepts them without drama. He stirs once, twice, then leaves the spoon to rest along the rim, its handle carefully angled so it cannot fall and startle the quiet. Outside the doorway, a jar of barley beer breathes its coolness into the evening. A cup is filled and sipped as if it were a conversation with the day. You did your part. We did ours. Thank you. The beer agrees without words. A grandmother sits with her feet on a low stool. The youngest child pretends to read the pattern on her sandal straps. The grandmother pretends not to notice. So the pretending can be complete. Doorstep conversations, how the day is set down. Doorsteps become benches. A casual string of neighbors finds its shape, 2 here, 3 there. A pair across the lane. The talk follows a well-known path. How the river behaved. Which stall moved first. Whether the runner left on time. If the cat has changed routes. Nothing urgent. Everything settled. Someone brings out a small dish of olives that did not need to be fancy to be excellent. Someone else offers a bowl of salted cucumbers, thin as coins. Each slice holding a trace of afternoon sunlight turned into flavor. A child tries not to crunch loudly and fails. Laughter is gentle, as if wrapped in wool. Farther down the lane, a reed flute lifts a short series of notes, repeating them until the repetition becomes the point, an invitation to listen without anticipating the next thing. The tune makes the air softer where it passes. The sky stages its quiet theater, a deepening blue. Then the first careful stars. Then the larger ones that know they are expected. People look up only now and then, because stars do not require supervision. Recipes for the night, 3 ways to make enough, in one courtyard. An aunt teaches a night recipe that every child already knows and still wants to learn again. Steeped lentils with bread and onion oil. Warm a palmful of oil in the smallest pot. Add onions sliced thin enough to forgive hesitation. Stir until the scent is honest and soft. Add lentils. Water enough to cover. And a pinch of salt saved from the market cones. Simmer until the lentils forget they were once hard. Tear bread into the bowl first, pour lentils over, eat slowly. With thanks. Little date cakes for quiet conversation. Mash dates into a paste with a wooden pestle that remembers other evenings. Mix with ground barley and a hint of oil. Shape into small rounds. Warm on a flat stone long enough to coax the sweetness forward. Share before they cool. They are better that way. Onion, herb, and olive toss. Slice onions thin and whisper to them in the pan with the last of the oil. Add a pinch of dried herbs saved from the roof beam. Stir in olives and remove from heat. Serve beside water or beer, whichever the evening asks for. No one measures in exact ways. Hands know. Eyes know. And the smell tells the rest. The recipes are not just food, they are ways to hold the night steady, gentle errands, borrowed coals and shared water. A boy is sent to borrow a live coal from the neighbor because the family's flame has grown shy. He carries a small clay cup lined with ash to cradle the ember. He walks as if balancing a crown no one can see. The neighbor gifts a coal and 2 extra. Just in case. The boy glows with the responsibility. He returns like a procession of one. A girl fetches cool water from the jar that was shaded all afternoon. She pours it into cups and watches the surface settle. A quiet miracle she decides to witness fully. She breathes with the water until it is still enough to drink. On the low wall, the cat receives a pinch of fish saved for it. Cats understand commerce too. But their gratitude is an art so subtle it can be mistaken for independence. The cat eats, licks a paw, and acts as if the food arrived by decree of the stars. Stories for the evening, boats, stars. And reed that became a flute. A grandfather begins a river story with the words everyone expects, when the Nile was feeling especially wide. The children settle. Adults pretend to look uninterested and then drift closer. He tells of a boatman who learned the constellations not by their heroic names but by the work they supervised, the net for fishing nights, the jar for carrying water, the bread for mornings that needed comfort. He says the boatman never got lost because he named the stars after what he loved. He tells of a reed that wanted to be useful and became a flute, and how the maker played only the notes the reed already knew. He says the best songs are not invented, they are allowed. He tells a small, smiling tale about onion skins that became paper sails for a child's toy boat, and how the toy wandered into the adult's heart and set up a gentle camp there. When he finishes, no one applauds. The evening acknowledges the story by continuing to beat self. Temple rounds, steps that sound like respect, near the market's edge. A temple attendant takes an evening round. He carries a small lamp in a niche of wood. The flame is humble and determined. He looks at the doorway as he passes. Then at the little basin where water waits for morning. He places his palm on the wall with the familiarity of a caretaker and the tenderness of a friend. He does not scold the night for arriving. He thanks the day for having been enough. He speaks a sentence under his breath. The kind that is said daily so it does not need to be loud. The sentence has no sharp corners. It keeps company with the flame and the wall and the listening ear. When he returns inside, he sets the lamp where it can continue to be useful and not proud. The door closes with the faintest wooden sigh. Night on the river, cool banks and wide silence. Back at the riverbank, the night has arranged itself. Water pools are darker shade than the sky. The reeds draw simple lines across the edge. A boat's rope knocks the post twice, quits, knocks once more, and then remembers itself. A frog chooses one note and repeats it as if guarding a small treasure. People sit on the bank, not close enough to disturb each other, close enough to keep company. They let the river do the talking. The breeze speaks the dialect of coolness. The stars add punctuation. Someone crumbles the last of the bread into the water and watches circles fold out and fade. Someone else leans back on elbows and tells their body that the ground is a friend. A third person closes their eyes and travels without moving, to the fish stall, to the papyrus shade, to the salt cones that looked like patient little hills. When the night feels fully itself, people rise without hurry and return to their doors, which open with the soft consent of old wood. House quiet, the long breath before sleep. Inside, mats are unrolled like intentions. Pillows know the shape of familiar heads. A jar lid is settled with the small twist that makes tomorrow easier. The hearth is persuaded to remember its heat without broadcasting it. A mother tells a short blessing. May the bread hold together. May the water stay cool. May the river avoid sharp moods. May the market remember our names. No one needs more than that. The house exhales. Sleep walks in like a parent returning late but trusted. Pre-dawn. Crafts in the dark. And a second you wouldn't last a day. Papyrus workshop. Before light, bakers. brewers, and the quiet that works. Night reaches the part of itself that knows morning is nearby. The town does not wake yet, only certain rooms do. The bakery is one of them. A baker lifts the oven's small door and listens to the low growl of stored heat. He respects it the way a sailor respects a tide, as a partner with moods. He sweeps ash from the floor with a bundle of reeds and appreciates the sound, dry, soft, delicate as sand rubbed between fingers. Bowls of dough have been resting. He presses them with a cautious fingertip. The dough yields and returns slowly, like a well-mannered thought. He divides it by feel, not by measure, and rounds each piece with movements learned before his beard knew grey. He scores the tops with a blade that knows its path. The loaves go into the oven in a rhythm that both governs and is governed by breath, place, pause, adjust, close. Heat takes over. The room is quiet except for a rare snap like a seed deciding its future. A street away, a brewer checks the mash, warm, not hot, alive, not hurried. He stirs with a paddle that has learned the art of patience. He smells for the right sour sweet that means the day will have drinkable comfort. He nods when he finds it. A nod that includes everyone who will sip later, somewhere else. Someone salts a small fish for drying. Because not every day is generous and the careful ones prepare for that. A runner ties his sandals with double knots and rubs his calf with oil so the miles will feel welcomed. The stars make their final, soft statement and consider stepping back. The river loads its morning promises. At the dark blue water carries a skin of grey that will be gold soon. Boatmen move with the particular grace of people who know their work well enough to forget they are moving. A crate is placed. A jar is set. A rope is thrown with the quiet accuracy of repetition. Bundles of papyrus are lifted aboard for delivery, tied clean, straight, and light enough to float if the river chose mischief. The man with the ledger yawns, smiles at his own yawn, and writes a mark that looks like a miniature river turning, then straightening out. A traveler arrives too early and, therefore, perfectly. He waits without fidgeting. The dawn rewards him by letting the breeze pass through his shirt and cool a memory he hadn't named yet. The boat he will take nods at the post as if greeting him ahead of time. The bank smells like wet rope and confidence. The runner's first route, words with sandals. The runner starts with the sky still shy of color. He carries letters from last afternoon and a new pair from a baker who wanted to tell a cousin that the oven behaved and the loaves rose in good spirits. He runs along the river, then away from it, then back again, keeping company with water because water understands distance without fuss. He does not count steps, the ground counts for him. He marks time by ordinary wonders, a water bird tilting its head, a breeze stitching the reeds into a temporary pattern, a dog deciding to escort him for exactly 20 paces and no more. At his first stop, he leaves a letter in the agreed niche, a small shelf cut into a wall where light visits each morning. At the next, he greets a woman drawing water. She thanks him with a cracked cup of coolness. He drinks and continues, more refreshed by the gesture than the water. By the time the sun outgrows the horizon, he has kept several households tied together with papyrus and ink and breath. Papyrus workshop, the craft of memory. Today, you will stand inside a papyrus workshop, quiet, fibrous, and fragrant with clean water and cut stem. If you tried to work here for a day, with your modern restlessness and your need for progress that announces itself, you might not last. Here, progress is what happens when your hands repeat something so well they no longer brag. Bundles of green stalks lie by the trough. A worker peels away the stern rind with a narrow knife that has learned to be careful. Inside, pale, moist ribbons that hold the plant's purpose. These ribbons are cut into strips. Not thick, not thin, just appropriate. They are instant till the water runs from them the way a sentence runs from a clear mind. On a low table, a worker lays the first layer of strips in a row, edge to edge, each piece touching its neighbor without argument. Then comes the second layer, placed across the first, turning the pattern into a quiet cross. Water is brushed over with a flat reed pedal. Weight is applied, not a crush, but a persuasion. The fibers embrace, sheets wait under modest pressure, boards, stones. The day itself. Time does its part. Later, the sheets are lifted. Their faces still damp, and set to dry in air that knows the difference between patience and delay. A boy sands the dried sheets with a smooth stone the size of his palm, coaxing the surface to accept ink kindly. He does not hurry. He understands, perhaps without words, that this sheet will carry an apology across villages or a list of lentils owed between friends or a blessing suitable for a doorway. If you stood here, you would hear no music, no speeches, no urgency. You would hear swish, tap, hush, press, the vocabulary of a craft that hides its pride inside the quality of the result. A man lifts a finished sheet and tilts it to the light. Fibers show their faint alignment like a map of a gentle river delta. He smiles with half his mouth. He stacks the sheet among others. Edges aligned to a degree that feels like courtesy. If you insisted on speed, the papyrus would remind you, we do not bruise well. If you demanded novelty, the knife would point at the pile and say, this is the novelty, enough. Again. And if you stayed, you would learn that enough is not a small word. The ink maker, black, red, and the smell of certainty. Not far from the workshop, an ink maker tends a small hearth. He grinds soot with a little water and a whisper of gum to teach it to hold together. He tests the mix with a reed tip on a scrap sheet, watches the line dry, then rubs it lightly with his thumb. If the line stays faithful, he nods. If it smudges, he adjusts the proportions with the serenity of someone who believes in second chances. He prepares a red ink with ochre ground fine and patient. Red is not for decoration alone. It is for headings, for warnings, for names that need to carry their own lamp into the text. He bottles it in a small jar with a stopper that fits as if the jar had grown around it. He labels nothing. He recognizes his work by its scent and its way of reflecting light. The scribe who buys from him will recognize it too, by the way it obeys the pen and resists the wrong kind of adventure. The scribe's morning, letters that begin the day. The scribe returns to his mat before the market fully wakes, because some letters prefer cool air. He writes a list for a widow who keeps her accounts tidy so grief does not spill into every corner. He copies a hymn for an attendant who likes to say it from memory but trusts paper as a companion. He drafts a simple contract for a pair of cousins buying a boat together. The kind of document that holds cousins in a friendly line when the current pulls different ways. His reed pens make their tiny sounds, the tick of tip on grain. The lift. The set. The lift again. The black ink dries honest. The red makes a brief declaration and then calms down. He wipes the pen, trims it one whisper thinner, and continues. If you sat across from him and tried to hurry, he would not be offended. He would just hand you a scrap and invite you to write your own name slowly until your own hand agreed to the morning. Most people accept the lesson without noticing it was offered. The market wakes once more, the day remembers its lines. By now, the market returns to itself, as it always does. Mats unfurl with the authority of experience. Wooden boxes tilt into displays. The fish stall arranges silver and shadow. The bread pyramid rises like a modest hill, warm and generous. The beer jars wait for the first ladle to touch them and confirm that coolness has survived the night. The papyrus vendor ties a new stack with his twice-sure knot. The ink maker arrives with little jars that clink gently in a basket stuffed with reed fluff to keep them from colliding. The scribe greets them both with the kind of nod that says, the day will be easier because you are here. People begin to drift in, speaking softly as if the morning were a sleeping child. The first bargains are not really bargains, they are greetings dressed as arithmetic. A new visitor, someone from a little distance away, examines the papyrus, then the bread, then the fish, in that order, as if reading a recipe for a good day. He buys nothing yet. He is making the decision slowly. Which is the best way to decide in a market that plans to exist tomorrow? The second vignette, why you wouldn't last today. If a traveler bragged, I could do this papyrus work easy, the workshop would blush for him and then forgive him. By mid-morning, his shoulders would learn the ache of careful repetition. His fingers would understand the difference between pressure and force. His breath would discover that patience has a tempo. His eyes would tie a knot from reading but from aligning, strip to strip, edge to edge. Day to day, he would, perhaps, ask for a louder success. Something that announces itself. The foreman would show him a pile of finished sheets, identical and ready. Here is your trumpet, he would say. And the traveler would realize the trumpet sounds like paper stacked well. He would sleep that night with the smell of clean water in his hair and the feel of fiber in his palms. And he might, for the first time in a long time, believe that enough is a beautiful word. Noon again, circles close kindly. By midday, the town resembles itself from yesterday and the day before. The kind of resemblance that comforts. Bread dwindles to a dignified few loaves. The fish seller knows which family will arrive late and has saved an excellent pair without announcing the favor. The beer woman wipes the jar's mouth and adds a little extra for the man whose quiet is softer today. The scribe rests his knee and writes one last line in red to usher a text into usefulness. The papyrus vendor counts bundles by the weight of his arms, not the number in his head. The ink maker ties his basket closed and enjoys, secretly, how the knot feels when it meets itself. The river glitters as if applauding the ordinary. Afternoon shadows, reassurances for tomorrow. People make the small plans that build a life. A cousin's visit after the next market day. A repair to the awning before wind thinks of it. An extra jar of water left in the coolest corner for a neighbor who walks the long road. Promises are made softly and kept the same way. A child is told, yes, the cat will likely visit again. A grandmother nods, meaning both perhaps and we will act as if yes. The market does not end, it rounds itself. The day does not vanish, it places itself where you can reach it tomorrow. Closing blessing, what the paper, bread, and river know, if you listen gently, you can hear the blessings the day says to itself. Papyrus, may I carry words faithfully and not keep any for myself. Bread, may I be enough for mouths that ask politely. Beer, may I cool the thoughts that run too fast. Ink, may I remain where placed and not wander. Reeds, may I remember that baskets are conversations turned solid. River, may I forgive clumsy oars and accept careful ones. You can take any of these with you. They do not spoil. Drift, light eases, then thins. The town invents evening again. You step back from the market and the workshops. Across the reed mats. Beyond the river's patient sentence. If sleep has arrived, let it keep you. If it is still on the path, give it your quiet to follow. The Nile breathes, you breathe, the day begins again. Somewhere between the two seasons of the market, flood songs, and the long patience of work, the market wears the year. The market does not own clocks, it wears seasons. When the river is full and generous, the ground accepts the flood like a guest who knows the house rules. When the water pulls back, the land shows its back, dark and ready. When the harvest comes, baskets confirm what mouths already guessed, that the year remembered kindness. People speak the old three-part calendar as if reciting a lullaby. Ahet when waters rise, Pet when planting and growing, Shemu when reaping and resting just enough to gather strength again. The market changes costume but not character. In Ahet, boats become streets and the edges of the world are drawn with water. The papyrus stacks rest higher, away from damp curiosity. Fish exchange places with onions in the center row. Rope sellers thrive. Baskets learn to ride. The scribe wraps letters in an extra layer and chooses words that travel well in a humid air. In Pet, the stalls smell green and hopeful. Young herbs appear in small bundles tied as if with a promise. There is talk, not loud, of seed, of depth, of spacing that has served parents and will serve their children. People hold their tools like instruments that already know the song. In Shemu, the market lifts its chin. Loaves rise taller. The beer smiles wider. The fish are salted against the day when the river chooses to be shy. A string of copper coins changes hands with the satisfied clink of efforts meeting outcomes. You do not need to memorize this. Your body understands the seasons even when your mouth forgets their names. Flood's edge, boats along doorways. During Ahet, the lanes near the river become water corridors. A boat noses up to a threshold where a doorstep would usually be. The oarsman taps the lintel with the end of his pole. The gentle knock of a neighbor. People step in and out as easily as if they were stepping across a puddle. Because this is not trouble, it is just the river speaking its wider voice. A woman passes a small sack of barley as if handing over a story. The oarsman returns a jar of oil promised last week. Accounting changes medium but not meaning. Cats master the new geography first. They walk the slim places and the shady railings with the certainty of animals who believe the world was built for them. And sometimes it was. On the water. A child's laughter rides without getting wet. Flood songs, hymns for useful water. At the edge of the inundation, a short evening hymn rises. It is not a festival. Just a flood song sung to keep gratitude awake. Voices choose a low range that agrees with water. Someone keeps time by tapping a reed stem against their palm. Tick, tick, tick. Like small oars. The words are very old and very simple. Water come. Not too high. Not too fast. Fields drink. Bones rest. Fish forgive nets. Reeds accept knives. Household jars remember coolness. Let tomorrow be neighbor to today. Children add a nonsense refrain that fits perfectly. Because sense is not always the main ingredient of comfort. The hymn ends the way rain ends, by deciding it has said enough. Planting days, seeds know the depth. When pet arrives, seeds exchange palm to earth. A farmer's hand learns the difference between shallow that dries and deep that sulks. He aims for just right, which is not a number but a practice. The market reflects this quiet agriculture. A stall displays seed satchels sewn from old cloth, labeled not with letters but with tiny tied-on samples, a few barley kernels, a lentil or two, a sprig of herb, a drawing of a cucumber that looks like a child's accurate dream. Buyers run the grains through their fingers and nod as if they've heard a line from a familiar poem. Tools ask for mending and get it, a hoe with a loosened socket, a wooden rake that needs a new tooth. The mender's awl moves steadily, stitching wood to its own future. He hums a note that makes the tools less afraid of the ground. Meanwhile, the scribe writes short calendars for households that prefer to see days stretched on papyrus, small boxes of chores, marks for moon phases, a line for when to worry and a big line for when not to. Harvest days, baskets learn to overflow without boasting. In Shemu, the market breathes out. Grain heaps rise like modest hills. The baker smiles at dough that practically rises at the thought of warmth. Beer jars complain only when lifted. And even then only to sound useful. Children are given counting jobs that feel like games. How many cones of salt in one row? How many rows? They count until the number stops being a number and becomes a rhythm. A grandmother rewards a good count with a dried figure, which is the right reward according to several centuries of evidence. The fish seller keeps a special basket hidden under the table, the saved best. Held for a widow who arrives late because she cares for two small shadows. No announcement is made. The exchange happens like a yawn, natural, contagious, and oddly dignified. At day's end, brooms speak their dry syllables to the ground. Dust departs the way sunlight does, visibly and with no apology. Keeping the ledger, the man who invents quiet numbers. You have seen the man with the ledger at the river. In seasons of much or little, he writes the day into rows and columns that feel like lintels and beams, beige architecture made from ink. His book is not a trap, it is a map. People trust it because it tells the same truth regardless of appetite. He records boats by their quirks, the one with the patched bow, the one that rides shallow and proud, the quiet ferry with rope that doesn't complain. He dates deliveries with a notation only he understands, a small dot if the boatman made a joke. A tiny underline if the jar smelled especially of promise. A triangle if the cat sat on the coil of rope during unloading. These marks never appear on any official copy. They live in the real book. Where the day keeps its smile, he balances totals not to close a door but to open tomorrow. When the numbers agree, he feels the same relief as when a knot slides true. Festival without drums, the market's soft celebration. Sometimes there is a festival that refuses to be loud. Lamps are set in shallow clay saucers and spaced like calm thoughts along the aisles. Bread is baked with a pressed stamp on the top, tiny patterns of fish, lotus, or a single dot that means here is a story we don't need to tell out loud. Children carry tiny reed lanterns that glow like captured bees. And they walk as slowly as important officials to keep the light calm. Adults pretend not to be charmed and fail beautifully. Someone lays a cloth and arranges gifts for the river, a loaf, a jar, a single polished pebble, a sprig of herb. The river, being old and well-mannered, accepts the thought and returns it as cool air. At festival's end, people take their lamps home. The market stands in the dark with the contentment of a room tidied quietly, crafts and callings, gentle apprenticeships, and vignettes of enough. The basket maker, conversations turned solid. A basket maker works near the papyrus stall. Her hands speak in loops and lines. Reeds soak in a trough like long sighs waiting to be braided. She begins at the center, the way many good things begin, and persuades the reed to circle without forgetting straightness. Apprentices learn the lesson of even tension, not too much. Or the basket remembers your impatience and returns it later, not too little. Or the basket grows lazy and collapses into mood. The master says, pull as if you respect the reed's future home, a shoulder, a wall, a boat. The apprentices nod. They will need several baskets worth of practice to understand. When a basket is finished, she thumps its base with a flat hand. The sound tells her whether it will ride a boat without sulking or live on a shelf without dreaming of falling. She trims the tails and smooths them with a thumb. She doesn't smile much, the baskets do it for her. The oil press, a slow arithmetic of weight, at the oil stall. Pressing happens in miniature. A small beam, a friendly stone, a bag of seeds that were once sunshine. The owner pours a measured scoop into a cloth and tightens a twist until drops gather like patient thoughts at the lip of a spout. He tests each batch with a sliver of bread. If the bread nods, the batch is good. If the bread frowns, rare, but possible, the pressman adjusts with the unbothered grace of someone who does not argue with outcomes. He keeps 3 small jars, plain, herb, festival. The festival jar contains a secret mix that changes with the season but always tastes like memory. He writes orders with a stub of charcoal on a scrap basket lid. The wind erases old promises. New ones write themselves where the old ones stood. Everyone agrees that this is precisely fair. The potter, clay that remembers hands. The potter sits with a small kick wheel, slow enough to be trusted. Clay's a river's younger cousin, and it accepts shape with amiable stubbornness. A bowl rises not because the hand insists but because it invites. He centers the lump with palms that know how to apologize for pressure. The wheel turns a conversation into a curve. Walls thin under steady persuasion. A rim appears and is persuaded to be gracious. At leather hard, he burnishes with a smooth stone until the bowl wears a glow like the calm part of a sunset. He teaches an apprentice one sentence that seems unrelated and proves essential: breathe out when you lift the wall. The apprentice practices exhaling at the right moments everywhere, at the wheel, at the table, by the river, in bed. Life improves in tiny, unadvertised ways. Finished pots line up to catch light. Each one reflects a different shade of yes. The ferryman, pathways that move. The ferryman has only one path, but it slides side to side all day. He lives between shores and learns the moods of crossing. When the current pretends to be generous, When the Pole finds purchase without needing to ask twice. When oars sleep on their pegs and the boat glides on conversation alone, he counts not money but arrivals, the woman who always thanks the river before she thanks him, the boy who tries not to look at the cat that tries not to look at him, the basket that carries herbs so fragrant the boat dreams of cooking. He knows the exact angle to catch a drifting hat and the correct tone to remind a distracted passenger to sit. If you tried this calling for a day, your feet would learn balance from the ankles up. Your hands would grow the memory of rope. And your eyes would memorize 1,000 small floating answers to questions you didn't know you'd asked. At dusk, he ties the boat and pats the thwart like a friend who did most of the talking. The market's small laws, courtesy worn smooth. The market enforces laws that are more manners than rules. No one shouts bargains during the first hour, mornings belong to choosing and greeting. Bread does not sit where fish sits. Unless wrapped in a layered politeness of leaves and cloth. Reed pens never point at people like spears, they rest with their tips turned inward. The way a good sentence avoids jabbing the listener, there is a custom regarding leftovers. If the sun reaches a certain angle and a certain loaf still waits, the baker breaks it into 4 and places each piece in a different quiet corner of the market. Those who need it know the corners. Those who do not need it know to leave the corners alone. Disputes are resolved by the ledgerman's quiet bench. People sit on either side and speak one sentence at a time, with elbows on knees and hands open. The bench was built low for this reason. Long speeches feel silly when your knees are so close to your ears. When agreement arrives, and it always does, the bench creaks once, as if to say, I have done my small job too. House remedies, the gentle medicine of enough. A healer walks the aisles with a basket that smells like a careful garden. She does not promise miracles, she promises useful comfort. For a cough, she suggests warm water with crushed dates and a thread of oil, sipped slowly while listening to someone else read a letter. For a stomach too proud, she recommends a walk by the river to borrow its pace. Then bread no bigger than a hand, eaten with consideration. For knees that resent stares, she sells a small cloth packet of warmed sand to rest under the joint while counting to 60 twice. She keeps a jar of honey for stubborn wounds and a roll of soft linen for the kinds of hurts that obey wrapping. When asked for grand cures, she points to small habits: sleep near the floor when the night is hot. Stretch your fingers before you lift. Put today's worry into tomorrow's basket only if it fits without pushing. The market believes her because nothing in her basket is louder than sense. School under the palm, reading what the day writes. A teacher borrows shade from a palm at the market's edge. Children sit on mats that were baskets yesterday and will be baskets again tomorrow. Lessons use the materials at hand, counting with onions, measuring with reeds, spelling with small breadcrumbs arranged into letters and then eaten as a reward. He teaches reading by letting the children read the market, the fish stall's prices as a math problem, the papyrus vendor's labels as short words, the salt cones as geometry. He shows how a contract is a story where both heroes get the ending they were willing to sign. He asks each child to describe the river in 4 words. They try: cool, patient, strong, friend. He nods. Because none of those are wrong. At the end, he hands each child a scrap of papyrus and says, write your name slowly enough that it feels like you. The scraps look like a flock of small birds learning to fly. He blesses them all with the same word, enough. Night watch, the market asleep on purpose. When night chooses deep, a watchman walks the aisles without worrying them. His lamp describes gentle circles that make shadows behave. He checks the hooks, the knots, the lean of a stack. He sets his ear to the river and listens for the small emergency that often turns out to be nothing at all. He keeps a pocket of chalk to leave notes on posts where they will greet the morning. Tighten this rope. Replace this peg. Remember to thank the cat. The last note appears more often than you'd expect. If the wind tries a trick, he unties a corner of an awning to let it flatter, not fight. If a jar complains, He settles straw around its base like a mother tucking a child's feet. By the time the east is no longer entirely black, his lamp is sleepy and so is he. He tells the lamp, "We did our part." And the lamp, being a lamp, agrees. Another dawn. Another enough. Morning does not arrive so much as unfold. The way a reed mat unrolls, soft, linear, inevitable. The bread has decided to be fragrant. The beer has decided to be agreeable. The papyrus has decided to accept ink without drama. The river has decided to keep being the oldest thing that still understands new days. Stalls take their places like actors in a play that refuses to be boring. Because comfort is not boring when you need it. People walk the same routes with slightly different thoughts. A cat chooses today's bench. The ledger page waits, blank with confidence. The market lifts one eye, then the other, then both, and smiles. Epilogue: 5 small blessings to pocket. If you wish to carry the market with you into sleep, take these 5. The reed lesson: bend enough to become useful, not so much you forget your shape. The bread lesson: rise because it is time, not because anyone is watching. The river lesson: move and still be considered a place. The ink lesson: stay where you're put when it helps, flow only when invited. The basket lesson: hold without becoming heavy, breathe once for each. Let the breath be the boat that knows its shore. The Nile breathes, you breathe. The market continues, quiet, ordinary, generous, exactly where you left it. Exactly where you'll find it again. Linen, dyes, and music that teaches the hands. Morning cool in the weaver's street. The lane beside the market wakes with a thrum too soft to be called a sound. Warp threads wait like quiet harp strings. A shuttle naps in a basket, then stirs and remembers what a day is for. A weaver ties her hair with a strip of linen that failed a previous perfection test, good enough to serve ahead, not good enough to meet a buyer. She approves of this hierarchy. She checks the loom, the cross sticks, the pegs, the weights that persuade threads to behave like lines. Breath in, breath out, the shuttle travels, left to right, right to left, carrying weft that does not argue with warp. The cloth grows in a way plants would understand, cell by patient cell. Across the lane, a second loom leans against a wall the color of pale toast. Its maker hums a note as steady as the Nile at dawn. Children pass and slow their feet to the speed of cloth, flax to thread, the long kindness of hands, on a low mat. Flax fibers rest like small river falls of straw-colored hair. A spinner moistens fingers, draws out a whisper-thin stream, and teaches it to twist. The twist is a reasonable compromise between strength and kindness. The spindle grows heavier by grace, not haste. A girl learns the join, how to feed the next breath of fiber so the line continues without a scar. Her teacher says, let your fingers invite, not drag. The girl tries again. The thread answers yes. Nearby, a skein is wound around a simple frame. The spinner counts by touch, not by number. When the skein is complete, she ties it with 4 loose embraces so it will not forget itself in the jar of dye. Dyes, pots of quiet color, in the shade of a reed screen. Dye pots do their short, warm thinking. One is the color of green plants boiled into memory. One is a mild red born from a patient root. One is a brown that remembers riverbanks. There is also the natural pale of linen, which many prefer because it looks like light-wearing clothes. The dyer lowers a skein with a rod that looks like a short branch and treats it with the respect due to any branch that has become a tool. The pot answers with a soft bloop that could be laughter. The skein drinks until it is ready. It is lifted, turned, pressed against the side to shed what it does not need, and hung where wind can pass its fingers through. There are no shouted miracles in this stall. Only gradual agreement between fiber and color. Finishing linen, the stone that polishes light. When a length of cloth leaves the loom, it is not done. It visits the fuller's bench, where water, gentle soap, and steady hands encourage the threads to settle. Then a smooth stone, the same size as a calm thought, presses along the surface, waking a soft glow. The cloth sighs as if relieved to finally be itself. A buyer arrives to examine a bolt. She runs a palm across it with the nap, then against, as tradition instructs, to hear two different answers to the same question. Both answers please her. She nods once. The polite punctuation of satisfaction. Tailor's mat, seams that refuse drama. A tailor sits cross-legged with bronze needles and thread that thinks in straight lines. He marks a tunic outline with a bit of charcoal that has written more patterns than letters. He cuts with a knife that avoids pride. Seams are small moon arches of stitches. Even enough that the fabric forgets where one breath ended and the next began. He fits a shoulder to a body that carries baskets, and leaves room for lifting and setting down. He hems so the edge will not mutter after the third washing. He knots each thread with the economy of a man who believes in the future. Music for work, the reed pipe's lesson. At mid-morning, the reed piper arrives and leans on a wall near the dyer's stall. He plays a short pattern, 6 notes that step out. Bow. Step back. Then rest. He repeats until repetition is the music. The looms slip into that pulse. Shuttles travel like boats keeping station. The dyer stirs at the beginning of the phrase and lifts at the end. The piper teaches tempo without orders. He keeps the market together the way the river keeps shores from forgetting they are shores. The linen ledger, measuring enough. The linen vendor uses a measuring cord knotted at regular courtesies. He winds, counts knots under his thumb, and speaks the tally in a voice that never rises above the cloth. When he reaches the end, he ties a slip knot that can be undone in one thoughtful tug. He says, "May it wear well," which is blessing and receipt at once. A woman buys a narrower strip to bind jars against dust. A man buys longer lengths to shade a courtyard that feels too bright by afternoon. A girl spends 2 small coins on a handkerchief she will lend to her grandmother whenever stories get happy enough to water rise. Boats, repairs, caravans, and the market that greets the horizon. Boats repair, wood that learns the river. At the river's edge, a boatwright kneels beside a hull that has begun to whisper complaints. He listens, taps along the plank line with a thin mallet, and finds the seam that dreams of being a crack. He does not shame it for dreaming. He cleans the seam, gifts it fresh fiber, and persuades it closed with pegs that look like small decisions. Pitch warms in a pot and becomes obedient. It seals not like a wall but like a promise. The boat breathes out, lighter in spirit and no heavier in body. He sands an oar until it remembers smoothness. He oils the handle where palms will petition for help. He sets the oar across 2 posts and watches a boy practice the stroke taught by uncles and unpronounceable instincts. The boy learns to pull water without anger. The river appreciates this. Rope and knots, sentences that hold. A rope seller coils hemp and read like paragraphs ready to be read. She demonstrates 3 knots, one that greets, one that waits, one that refuses to forget. She names them not after sailors or kings but after their work. Welcome. Stay. Still. A ferryman buys a length of stay and pays with coin and a quiet joke. The rope seller laughs with her eyes closed, which is the market's way of showing trust without wasting breath. Donkey bells and pack lists, from inland. A caravan pads in on soft hooves. Donkeys arrive with bells that speak in polite clinks. The leader, a woman with sun in her shoulders, checks each load with the gentleness of a teacher inspecting copybooks. Her list is a scratch of marks on a rolled reed strip, 1 for arrival, a 2nd for condition, a 3rd for mood. She does not explain the mood column. She does not need to. They bring clay jars whose bellies hold deserts coolly, salt slabs wrapped like tablets, dates that taste like afternoons, and resin that smells like old temples remembering new prayers. They bring stories too, folded and tied with twine. The market widens to receive them, creating space the way a courteous host does, by moving a bowl a little, a mat a little, a mood a little, exchange without hurry. Bargaining with the caravan is not a contest, it is choreography. The date seller tests a handful with a thumb press, the caravan leader nods and adds 2 more to the measure for traveler's luck. The resin trader opens a pouch and lets 1 grain dissolve on his tongue. Then on the buyer's palm. Agreement tastes trustworthy. The papyrus vendor trades sheets for a small bundle of incense to keep his stall smelling like steady thought. The ink maker swaps a jar of red for a coil of rope. Because sometimes lines need tying as much as letters do, the map that isn't a map. Children gather around the caravan leader's walking staff. Not because it is ornate, it is plain, but because she uses it to draw a map in dust. Not cities. Not borders, shade. Good water. Stones that pretend to be friendly and are not. A lonely bush that always forgives mistakes. She dots the dust for wells and draws a curve for a ridge that keeps its promises about wind. The children memorize useful shapes. The kind a traveler looks for when the world is only horizon and hope. The leader wipes the map away with 1 sweep. The knowledge stays where it needs to, in walking. Caravan camp, a market inside a circle, at day's edge. The caravan makes a small camp near the market's boundary. 3 stones. 1 pot. Ember coaxed from a stubborn heart. A line is strung between 2 pegs to dry a cloth rinsed of road. A donkey receives a scratch in the place that makes its eyelids sincere. Neighbors wander over with bread ends and curious questions. The caravan returns dates and distant weather. They eat together without ceremony. Bowls visiting each lap with the ancient choreography of take, taste, pass. Someone tunes a 1-string fiddle until the single string speaks. The reed piper joins with a cautious harmony. They do not decide on a song. The evening decides for them, night promises and morning departures. Before sleep, the caravan leader checks each pack strap with a tug that tells more than eyes. She sets water skins where morning will find them cool. She whispers the names of the animals like a roll call of gratitude. They answer by not moving. At first light, the market gives farewell gifts small enough to carry far, a cone of salt wrapped in a leaf, a tiny loaf stamped with a lotus, a scrap of papyrus with a blessings line. Black on pale. Sure of itself. The caravan answers with promises they intend to keep, to return by the road that prefers them. To carry the market's name to the next shade, when the bells fade. The market hears silence shaped like travel and decides to open for the day. 5 soft practices for a market day. If you would like to keep the market close as you rest, carry these 5 practices. Measure with mercy. Tie cords that can be undone with 1 patience. Repair early. Listen for seams that whisper and invite them closed before they shout. Trade stories as change. Let a small tale even the scales when numbers already agree. Play the 6-note pattern. Repetition is not boredom when it keeps hands calm. Bless what departs. Salt. A loaf. A line of ink, each goes farther when seen off kindly. Breathe once for each practice. Let the breath settle like dust after good footsteps. The river remembers. The market remembers. Your body remembers enough. Perfume. Incense. Children's games. And letters that walk themselves. The perfumer's shade, scents that speak in whispers, under a low awning. The perfumer arranges small stone jars the way a scribe arranges vowels, each necessary, each modest. A mortar rests like a sleeping bird. Inside, myrrh softened into paste. Resin folded with oil that has learned to be patient. Petals that have said everything they plan to say and now prefer to be listened to. He warms a spoon over a coal until it remembers kindness. Then lifts a thumb's worth of balm into a cup. The balm softens, not spills. He tests with the inside of the wrist, the place where skin hears the quietest messages. He nods once, which is how the market signs for yes when words would be louder than needed. People arrive with small purposes, a pinch for a festival, a smear for a scarf, a jar for a doorway, so visitors are greeted by something gentler than silence. The perfumer asks no questions about sorrow or celebration. He measures by smoothness, wraps by habit, charges as if gratitude had a weight. A child leans in and says the jars smell like stories before words. The perfumer smiles because that sentence is exactly correct and cannot be improved. Incense stand, smoke that draws straight lines upward, beside the perfumer. An incense seller sets cones in a tidy wedge. She lights one and lets the smoke climb without deciding. The first curl is grey, then pale, then something between. It draws straight lines only when the air forgets to move, otherwise. The lines become gentle questions. People buy a cone and a promise, one room made calmer, one memory made warmer, one corner taught to listen. She tucks each cone into folded papyrus like small boats taught to sail in place. No one hurries the smoke. It is polite about arriving and even more polite about leaving. Children's games, squares, stones, and secret rules. Across the aisle, children draw grids in dust with a stick as solemn as a judge. Smooth stones are placed, then moved, then taken, then returned, according to rules that exist and also change when younger cousins appear. When a breeze erases a line, they simply redraw it with the confidence of cartographers who own the map and the world it describes. A second game uses reed rings and a peg. The throw is learned in the shoulder, not the eyes. A boy misses and laughs first, which is the market rule for staying friends with games. A girl lands 3 in a row and keeps her smile small so the peg will not feel mocked. Now and then they play merchant and buyer with pebbles and crumbs. Bargains are made with numbers that float like bubbles and pop harmlessly. A grown-up watching from a bench says nothing, because the game is already teaching polite arithmetic. The carver's door, signs that mean welcome, in a lane that knows every foot. A carver leans a door on 2 stones and sits before it with patient tools. He cuts a lotus that understands curves. A reed that reminds the eye of wind. A fish that remembers the river kindly. None of the carvings are deep, all of them are sure. He explains to an apprentice that a door should say come in even when closed. Too many lines, he says. And it says look at me, too few. And it says nothing at all. The apprentice practices a single leaf until the leaf stops looking surprised to be a leaf. When the door is finished, the carver oils it with a rag that knows all the jobs a rag can be proud of. The grain stands up to be counted and then sits down again. Pleased, weather signs, what the river told the sky. By midday, people glance up in the old habit that predicts nothing exactly and yet helps. The ledger man notes the tilt of wind. Twice, the fish seller looks at birds over the opposite bank and decides whether to store or display more. The baker tosses 1 extra handful of chaff into the oven, because the air says steady heat will be needed later. A woman touches the dry side of a jar and smiles, the cool has lasted. She tells her daughter the jar test, how to know by feel whether water is content enough to wait. The daughter nods, then pretends she already knew, which is also part of the learning. If the breeze shifts, the incense smoke writes a new alphabet. The market reads it, not for drama, but for tomorrow's chores, letters that walk themselves. Not every message needs papyrus. Some walk by mouth memory. The scribe rehearses a note with an old market woman who will carry it to her sister, tell her the bread stamp is missing, ask for the one we used last harvest, say the pattern of 3 dots. Not the fish. The woman repeats it once, twice, then smiles as if the words have found chairs in her head. A boy is given a 3-part phrase to deliver to a mason, stone, 2 hands, door lintel. He does not forget because he has been taught to carry words like water, level and close, when they return. The scribe thanks them as if they had traveled farther than a road. In some ways, they have. A quiet dispute and the bench that listens. 2 neighbors bring a question to the bench, where a shade awning should end and a walkway should begin. They sit hip to hip. Not for friendship. Not for argument, because the bench is low. Each speaks 1 sentence at a time. The ledger man draws a rectangle in dust and divides it with a line that everyone can step over. They settle on half of the difference. Then press palms to the post that will hold the agreed rope. The bench creaks once. Satisfied. and returns to being wood, no one cheers. There is nothing to cheer. Agreement is its own sound. Evening practice, reading by lamp, counting by breath, as the day unbuttons itself. The teacher returns with a small clay lamp and a pinch of oil from the day's trade. Children practice names on scraps: mother, river, bread, cat. Between each word, the teacher says, breathe once. Writing should never chase its own tail. A grandmother asks for help with numbers, not because she has forgotten them but because company improves sums. They count salt cones left from the morning and decide the right number to become soup tomorrow. The lamp hums the quiet note of a wick doing its job. The cat chooses the safest lap and pretends to be incense. Moonlit repairs, night bread, river patrol, and the market's pocket of stars. Moon on the awning ropes. Night arrives with soft elbows. The moon finds the awning ropes and lays a silver line on each. A watchman runs a hand along the stay knot. Then the still knot. Then the welcome, not to doubt, only to greet. Ropes like to be greeted. They hold better when spoken to. A note in chalk from last night says, replace this peg. The watchman replaces it. Then adds, done. He blows dust from his fingers the way a scribe blows grit from a page. The night baker's gift. Tonight the bakery keeps a small fire alive to make night bread, flat, fast, kind to stomachs that remember late work. The dough is a quiet conversation: water, flour, a pinch of salt, a drop of oil if the jar permits it. Each round meets the hot stone, puffs in the middle, then settles like a bird choosing a branch. The baker hands a hot round to a ferryman coming off a slow crossing. Payment is waved away. The ferryman bows once for thanks, once for bread, once for the idea that bread should find the tired. River patrol, listening more than looking. A river guard poles along the bank, not to find trouble but to keep nothing company. He listens for rope against wood that sounds wrong, for water in a jar that should be still, for voices trying to be quieter than they need to be. Mostly he hears night being itself. He pauses where reeds tell secrets to wind, then pushes off gently so the boat remembers it is a boat and not a bed. Stars arrange themselves in patterns that do not need names. He nods at them as if they were colleagues. When he returns, he logs the patrol with 3 marks: safe, 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 which is the best line on any page. Menders of quiet things, under a lamp as small as a patient thought. 2 menders sit with work that prefers night, a veil edge that snagged on a nail, a basketeer that wishes to be strong again, a pen case that wants a new loop for its string. They talk in half sentences and nods. Thread moves through cloth the way fish move through reeds, seen and then not. The menders agree that fixing is better than making because it leaves a good ghost in the object, the memory of breaking, the relief of not being broken now. They set finished things aside and bless them with use. A story with only verbs, at a doorway. A father tells a child a story with only verbs to ease them toward sleep. Wake, wash, warm, walk, look, lift, laugh, learn, share, stir, sip, sigh, carry, count, carve, call, fold, fasten, finish, fade. The child smiles at the simplicity and adds 1 noun, cat, which is exactly the right number of nouns for this story. They sleep. The verbs keep watch. A pocket of stars. A young woman sits by the papyrus stall with a bowl of water used earlier for smoothing sheets. She looks in and finds stars in the bowl. The sky has put them there by ordinary magic. She does not reach in. She leaves them to be themselves. She tears a scrap and writes a 1-line poem. The river keeps the day. The bowl keeps the night. My breath keeps both. She folds the scrap and gives it to the scribe, who keeps such things between pages like pressed leaves. The market's last word, before dawn. The market says its last word to the night by doing 1 small thing each. The bread stall straightens a cloth. The perfumer caps a jar. The incense seller pinches a coal closed. The rope seller tucks the rope's tail under. The ledger man lays his reed beside the book just so. Nothing changes and everything is ready. Opening the same day again, light returns the way a gentle promise returns, familiar. Soft at first, then more certain. The river states its case without raising its voice. Loaves begin to be loaves. Smoke remembers how to draw straight. Papyrus decides to be useful again. The watchman rubs chalk from yesterday's notes and makes room for today's ordinary. A child redraws the game grid, confident that stones will find their squares and friends their laughter. The cat inspects each stall as if accounting were a kind of walking. The market stands, breathes, and says the word it says every morning. The one no one hears and everyone obeys, enough.